So I'm going to talk about AI, not in the same context that Massimo has talked about largely, which was the AI that's generating legal research and that sort of thing. I'm going to specifically talk about how it impacts the criminal law and go over some of those topics, and one in particular, the predictive AI, talking about future dangerousness, okay? So let's see if that's the right button, and it's not. How about that button? There we go. All right, so I guess I will stand over here, because
It's better.
yeah, we're okay, everybody can see and hear? All right. So what I put up here on the screen to start with is a very cumbersome definition by the United States government, and it's found in the financial unit manual, but it happens to be referred to by various federal agencies sort of cross-referencing this definition when they address an AI issue. Now, I like the one that that Massimo put up because it was very short and to the point. The reason I put this up is that artificial intelligence does a lot of things. So you can say AI could be a very simple program that just generates a result based on some limited input. Okay. It also, however, can be machine learning, which involves sort of another level. So Massimo talked about it a little bit. Machine learning involves the computer deriving information so that it can make future decisions with the benefit or detriment of that information. And then they go on to talk about other aspects of AI. But basically, in the context that we're going to be talking here, it is a system that involves taking in data from the bottom up, so I'm glad we had a discussion about that. You can do a pyramid. I think there was an inverse pyramid shown on the prior slides, but you can do a pyramid where from the top you have the programming, basically, the propositions that this particular computer program is going to work with, okay? And then from the bottom up, you have the actual data that gets inputted into the process. And it turns out that bias can be and is introduced at both the top and the bottom, right? Because if it's not programmed correctly, and it can be very subtle. I think I was mentioning in response to a question before we started here that I wasn't going to talk about this, but it's interesting. West Publishing Company in 1870 something or other had come up with this great computer program called the key number system. We don't have those books in here, but why we do. You can actually see in the beginning of all the opinions there was the key numbers, right? Now you've got it on Westlaw or Lexis, but there were the books that we don't have here are the digests. So the digest, you could look up a subject and you could find what you thought you were looking for, and then it would show you all the cases that had cited there, had that key number programmed in. So this is back in the 1870s or 80s, and that followed through, and of course key number was adopted by West in their Westlaw program. But in the course, when I started practicing, before we had computers for all this, Westlaw had different categories, or the West key number system, and these categories had a certain bias. For instance, if you wanted to look up labor law, what did you look for? Master and servant. Now, is that going to have some effect on how people perceive what they're researching and the outcome of their research? And lessor, lessee, real estate law came under landlord, tenant. We still use those words, but if you think about it, that's a little bit feudal. So there is an influence anyway. on how you program things from the top. And then, of course, there's an influence from the data below. Alan Turing was mentioned. Of course, the person who generated not only a lot of scientific intelligence in this area, but also some philosophical thought about what was going to happen, that the black box could actually replace intellectual human decisions. And Hubert Dreyfus, I don't know how many of you knew him, but he was a professor at UC Berkeley, philosophy professor. He had been at MIT, and he had had this big fight for decades. He's since passed, but big fight over whether or not Alan Turing's predictions would ever come true, because in his opinion, you could never actually compare machine learning to the human mind. And part of it is, part of his argument was that there's going to be a lack of empathy, sympathy, mercy, other intangible values that we want to prize as human beings or want to strive for. Can machine learning stand up to human intelligence in this regard? Some people say it does better because it tends to isolate and try to eliminate some of the biases. If you talk to Professor Dreyfus about it, he was also a Heidegger scholar. Those of you who follow those things forget about Heidegger's actual behavior during and after World War II, but one of the things he described very vividly was that human beings are thrown into the world. And so you have so many influences on your brain, on your consciousness, that are totally unaccounted for and can't be accounted for. And one of the examples that I like was, if you decided at the end of this you wanted to go home, and you might decide before the end of this you want to go home, you would go, okay, picture getting in your car and going home. What you don't picture is going over to the door, pressing the mechanism, having the mechanism unlatch the door, going through the other door. You don't picture all that because you're thrown into the world, and the world includes a lot of things that you don't consciously consider. And the question is, if the brain is a series of neuronal networks, neurons, with dendrites reaching out across various other neurons, very complex system. Can that be duplicated in a complex machine learning situation? And so the thought is, maybe it can, maybe it can't. It's so complex. Well, you can always get a more complex computer. Use the latest technology, and you can continue to expand the ability of computers to create these sort of neuronal networks. So I have a favorite thing I'm going to throw out here, and I wrote about it years ago. But you have neurons. You can't really see the neurons in the brain because the brain is mush, and so there's always the effort to actually get representations of neurons by using silver nitrate and some other things. And eventually they were able to show what neurons look like in their dendrites and how they are chained together by the synapses and all the things that we've since learned about that. But they're also glial cells. And if you got nothing better to do, you could research this. Nobody really knows what glial cells do. There are a few things that they do. They can guide neurons on a track so that neurons can develop, so your entire body can develop. But they don't really know what they do. And I have a bet for you, and then we'll go on to something more important here, that we're going to find out that glial cells are really the source of consciousness, because the electrochemical impulses in the neurons don't move fast enough to actually accomplish what we consider consciousness. Okay, so this is just a little side trick here for you to think about. But the study that I read years ago now involved injecting glial cells into the brains of mice. And the mice were able to do all the mice things that they do. They run around, they play with each other, fight with each other, whatever they do. But they were better at solving problems. The ones that had the glial cell injections, they were better at solving problems than the mice that did not. And I don't know where that research has gone, but it's something you can think about. Anyway, so if either through this very complex neuronal system that you have in your brain, or through that plus something else that accounts for consciousness, the question is, what can you do through machine learning or AI in general to replicate that? Now, one of the things that when we're talking about top down, and I did write a paper that was submitted, because I got excited and got ahead of myself, I guess, that was submitted to the Santa Barbara Lawyer magazine and was published in the November issue, which is just coming out. And I wrote another one for this that will be in the December, so you get two. But one of the things that I addressed, and maybe somebody will bring it up here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but was the trolley problem. How many people know about the trolley problem? Okay. How many people watch The Good Place? Okay. The Good Place is a ridiculous television series. They did this wonderful job of making the trolley problem real, and it was hilarious, actually. With the trolley problem, I hope I haven't seen everybody else's paper, so I hope I'm not stealing any thunder here. With the trolley problem, basically was developed by Philippa Foot, who was a philosophy professor, and she was actually, there's a paper about abortion and issues related to that, but the interesting thing was in the middle of it, she talked about the trolley problem, which got picked up out of a number of other examples that she gave, metaphors. The trolley problem simply is you've got a trolley that's on the track and it's headed towards 5 people who are working on the track. They don't know it's coming. If it keeps going, it's going to kill 5 people. Now remember, philosophers can make stuff up, and so you say, well, how do we know it's going to? No, it's just going to do it, okay? You got to accept what they say. It's going to kill 5 people. But you can flip a switch and make it go on the alternate track, and it'll just kill 1 person. And so what do? Well, it starts a whole philosophical discussion about utilitarianism. Do we save the 5 by killing 1? And now you're an agent, you have agency in pulling the switch, so now you're killing that person. Whereas if you just stood there, the 5 would be killed. But if you just stand there, anyway, it has a whole literature that follows it. And then they have the fat man, which subsequent philosophers decided not to say fat. I can say it because I'm a member of that oppressed class of fat men. They have the fat man on the bridge, and then do you push the fat man onto the trolley track, because that will stop the trolley from killing anybody except the fat man. Okay, so the literature, it goes on and on and on. Professor Michael Sandel at Harvard used this in his televised lectures on justice, and you get a lot of responses. Well, wait a second, pushing somebody off the bridge, that's a little different than switching the tracks and all that. And my favorite result, you can look on YouTube, was the little kid. I think he was 4 years old, and his father is videotaping, or whatever you call it. He's recording his son's reaction. So he has a little track set up with a little trolley. Got 1 guy over here, got 5 guys over there. So explains it to the kid and says, so what are you going to do? So the kid pushes the trolley ahead a little bit. Then he stops. And he takes the 1 man off the track. He puts it on with the other 5, and he runs over all 6. Anyway, so what does it have to do with anything? Well, self-driving vehicles are programmed to solve the trolley problem, right? And in other words, we say we're going to agonize it. Do we push this guy off? Do we hit the 1? Do we hit the 5? What do? We agonize as humans. We try to figure it out. And perhaps introduce a lot, well not perhaps, introduce a whole lot of information from the bottom up to make our determination. But it's, in a self-driving vehicle, is programmed. So that's why we have problems. The self-driving vehicles are hitting the construction workers on the side of the road. But what do they do if you got a school bus on one side and you got a pedestrian, and it's programmed, all right? So there are moral decisions that are programmed into artificial intelligence. Lethal autonomous weapons, with the word autonomous in the middle. These are the drones and the things that can actually make decisions in real time as to whether or not to strike a particular target. And there's a lot of literature on all this. It's interesting that the Department of Defense it just issued last year a directive to say that all autonomous weapons must be staffed by an actual human being to make final decisions. Now, can they really make a final decision? Because a lot of these decisions are made instantaneously almost by the computer, but they're there and they're going to take the flak for it if something goes wrong. The self-driving vehicles are not really self-driving vehicles. Now, recently there was just, I think the other day, there was a thing about, I think it was Waymo or one of those companies that has the vehicles that don't have a steering wheel or pedals, and they're only used for taxi services in very small confined areas in cities and whatnot, relatively slow speeds, but they are the true self-driving vehicles. According to the standards that are put forth by the Society of, Automotive Engineers, SAE, their self-driving vehicles go from 0 to 5 in categories. And the ones that are really self-driving, like the Waymos, would be a level 4. The industry has now said, and Tesla actually filed an SEC filing last year saying that they don't really make self-driving vehicles, that they are at best a level 2, and that a human must be responsible at all times. So they're not self-driving despite the hype. And there's been litigation about it. You can read about that. The idea is, though, that when you're looking at liability, criminal liability, I wrote a bit about that, as well as civil, what are you doing? You're saying, if you're Tesla, you're saying, hey, don't look at me. We got that human over there. There's no corporate liability, no company liability. It's just the driver of the vehicle who thinks they're in a self-driving vehicle. The government, with regard to the lethal autonomous weapons, is basically saying, look, we as a government are not going to be guilty of war crimes if you hit, and unfortunately we have these very recent examples I don't want to go into because it's very raw for a lot of people. But even looking back 10, 15 years, the government wants to say, we're not guilty of war crimes, because you had a human there. That human should have figured it out. And so it's placing liability in a different place. Quickly, and I don't know how much time I have, but there's a number of areas where 5 more minutes? Okay. A number of places where artificial intelligence impacts the criminal law. So we have probabilistic genotyping, which seems to be pretty neutral in a way, but there are biases that come in. I'm not going to talk about all these in detail. You can read about it. There's footnotes in my article. Probabilistic genotyping does suffer from certain assumptions and biases. It basically is a way to guess when you have alleles. So we can go into this and ask questions later, but you have alleles at certain loci when you're doing the genotyping, and sometimes you have drop-in or you have drop-out, you have stutter. So you may or may not have these peaks where you're supposed to find them, right? And so if you just assume that everything's right, there's no peaks there, so there's no allele, there are peaks there, so there's an allele, it's pretty straightforward. It's still subject to a whole lot of problems, but probabilistic genotyping says, well, you don't have a peak there, but you know what, you could, and it was just dropout. So why don't we figure out the probability of whether or not this sample could have had a peak there where there is no peak, and then multiply that by all the different loci that you look at and the various combinations, and it can create probabilities where none really should exist. We also have predictive policing, which we know can be an issue, and there's some AI with regard to shots that are fired. So there are gunshots, and it can attempt to locate the gunshot so police can go swoop in. That can be prejudiced by, rightly or wrongly, by inputting the likelihood that the shots came from a particular geographic area, say on one side of the tracks or the other, and so on. Facial recognition, there's a great deal of literature on that. It's not as effective with people with darker skin, and can lead to incorrect identities. And I think Pat was just talking about the using facial recognition when you also do the reconstruction first, and then do facial recognition on that. And as Pat was saying, what could go wrong there? And then you have pretrial detention, sentencing, and post-sentencing predictions, which I'm going to spend the last couple minutes on, and we'll go from there. So what do you have? So pretrial, you're talking about the likelihood of somebody showing up to court and the likelihood that they're going to be a danger to public safety, okay? First of all, there's no test that tests for both of those. That's ridiculous, okay? So the tests really focus on public safety. And we could go into a whole thing about what really should be done for pretrial release or detention. But people can end up in jail, sitting there for months or even years waiting to go to trial because one of these programs has suggested to the judge that there's a likelihood of danger to public safety. Now, there's two other places, so I'm going to try to cover all of these in the next couple of slides. Institutionally, once somebody is sent to prison, they can be classified. And I left out the sentencing there, didn't I? All right, well, anyway, there's sentencing where the judge can decide this guy should go to prison because he's a danger to public safety. There's institutional, once you get there, they classify, they can decide you're a danger. And then there's parole, eligibility for parole, and restrictions on parole and all that sort of thing. And all of these are subject to some sort of AI. What I've mentioned here, sentencing is a separate category. One of the problems that you have with using AI in sentencing is that it's not the only factor. A judge is going to make the decision still these days. But what is the basis for sentencing? Its basis for criminal law itself is blameworthiness and the needs of the victim in society. So you look at the categories of sentencing: retribution, rehabilitation, general and special deterrence, and incapacitation. You just got to lock somebody up because they'll just keep committing crimes. And all this has to be tempered by empathy, sympathy, and mercy, theoretically. Now, risk assessments, and here we list them, I guess, all four of them there, where you're doing the risk assessments. Now, a risk assessment at the time of bail is not recidivism because the person's presumed innocent. So you're not going to say reoffend. That's yet to be adjudicated. The question is, are they a danger to public safety? But it's often talked of in terms of the risk of reoffending. It's the risk of offending. Risk of recidivism, violence in custody, reoffending upon release. Now, one of the things, so here's a really basic, this isn't even AI, I don't think, but it's used by judges all the time, and they talk about it reverently, like there's some magic to this, and it's a bright, shiny object that doesn't work, and a lot of it's common sense. Here's the static 99R tally sheet. This is a total of 10 questions. And then they come up with a computation. At the bottom you can see, depending on how many points you get for each thing, you're either at a low risk or very low risk on up to well above average risk. And judges look at that and they say, oh my goodness, you're in the positive category, or 1, 2, 3, it's pretty bad. And, 4 or 5, you're toast, right? Judges follow these things, unfortunately. They're unduly influenced by it. Now, they don't always, and you can try to talk them out of it. I'll talk about COMPAS real quick, very quick, right? Very quick, okay. I don't want to overstay my welcome here. COMPAS, I think Massimo indicated there's 137 questions. There are 137. There's got 3 different versions. One of them is 137 questions. I was going to put it up, but it's way too long, but it's much the same thing. It's not that different from the static 99. It's just broken down into other categories. And so I'll skip through it quickly, and you can read in the article a little more about it. But it's basically the same thing. And what they say in the COMPAS manual, if you get their actual manual, they say that interpretation is a skill that needs to be honed over time. And it emphasizes that people that are inputting the information into the 137 questions have to be sensitive to a lot of different things, and they have to be aware of the various theories of criminality, as it were, what they call criminological theories. And they list some of them: social learning, subculture theory. I mean, it's bias is packed into some of this stuff, even though they try very hard to eliminate bias. So what about the so-called recidivism, or danger of offending or danger of reoffending? This whole question of whether or not you can use artificial intelligence to come up with something. It turns out that if you look at the studies, and they're in the footnotes in my article, they basically say that a lot of these programs are close to chance. There are other problems we can discuss, such as how do you decide whether or not your decision was correct, because either people go to jail or they don't go to jail, go to prison. It's hard to come up with a good way to analyze it. But even doing the best they can, a lot of these programs are just around chance or slightly better than chance. And then you have to define what it is. So a lot of the programs are, a lot of the literature is done by people who are associated with the programs. One of them said, well, we can predict recidivism because we're really good. If somebody has a high risk in our program, it's very likely that they will reoffend. What was reoffense in that case? Reoffense was having even a traffic ticket within 2 years. Okay? There wasn't having a violent felony, it wasn't, okay. So you can see there are problems with this, but just think about it for a second. And when we're trying to decide whether somebody should stay in a jail cell for months or years waiting to go to trial, or they should be sent to prison, where it has a very high rate of harm to the individual, to their family, and the community, we're making those decisions, and we're making them based on this recidivism calculation, or public safety calculation. So we have to look at any forensic tool that we use, basically from the position of the functional validity of the tool. They like to call it a tool to make it sound better, and then the validity as applied. And we can go into that at the lunch hour. What we're actually talking about are human beings, and there is a constitutional overlay to this. You have a right to due process in pretrial detention. You have the right against the right to bail under the 8th Amendment as well. You have the right to, under the California Constitution, in a couple different areas, you have certain rights, and the court has to make certain findings. We'll let you read about that because I'm way over my time. I'll just comment on White as I'm being ushered off. There's that big hook. The White case, my favorite case, I did an amicus brief in it, but they said this guy can't get out because he's accused of a sex offense because he was standing around when his friend went into a house and apparently accosted someone. And White, they said, well, he can't get out. And it went all the way to the California Supreme Court, and they said, yeah, we have very high standards, blah, blah, blah. Turns out while he was in front of the Supreme Court, before he got there, the DA said, yeah, even though the DA argued he had to stay in jail, the DA said, oh, well, we'll make a deal. Penal Code Section 32, accessory after the fact, you get credit for time served, and get on probation. So he's on probation while the Supreme Court is finding that he was so dangerous he couldn't be let out. And there's that, and thank you.